Myth Army, and welcome back to Life and Other Circus Skills for another update on the seemingly never-ending TBR. We are making progress though. There are gaps on the shelf. I was like, did I even tell you I was going to read this book? I don't know, so I'm going to tell you now. Norse Mythology, one of Neil Gaiman's collections. I don't really even know how to put my thoughts into words about this. And I think perhaps my expectations were in a weird place because it's Neil Gaiman, and I kind of felt like he was coming at this with, you know, I love the Norse myths and I want to sort of retell them from my perspective, blah, blah, blah. I kind of thought he was going to put Neil Gaiman level of magic in them. But that said, I've also never read any other versions of the myths, so I don't know how different his compilation is versus wherever else you might read them. But for me, it was just a little bit, I don't know, I guess maybe just some of the source material is a little bit traumatizing, and you know, growing up with fairy tales and things, I guess that I kind of had this expectation of each story is designed to teach you some kind of lesson, and I perhaps went in with that kind of thinking, and then reading the stories that wasn't what I got. I just mostly got disturbed. But I did actually, I sort of started to think, if you were someone who had perhaps read a lot of Greek mythology, and that kind of thing, perhaps this wouldn't be so jarring to you, whereas my expectations were just completely at the wrong end of the scale, so I just found it very weird. I found it very hard to read before going to sleep. I had some very disturbing dreams, but you know, I guess it ultimately does do what it says on the tin, but as I say, I think my expectations were just a bit skew-if, so that's all I've got to say about that, really. I'm now donating this to Laurie, who is a lot more well-versed in all things mythical from other cultures, so I think this will be a lot more up her street. So yes, I wait to hear her review on that. So next, talking of Laurie, I'm moving on to a book which I classically don't have with me. I've taken it into my bedroom already, but it is by a lady called Cooney, I think I've got that right, who does write a lot about Egyptology, I'm led to believe, and this was an AOB to the TBR, a gift from Laurie. She thought I would like it, and it's about a particular number of Egyptian pharaohs, and relating I guess the changes and the political statements they made to what's going on nowadays, and ultimately provides a bit of a commentary on patriarchal society. So it sounds really intense, but actually I have started to read the first chapter and I'm really loving the narrative style of the author so far. So I'm excited to see how this one turns out. I love all things Egyptology anyway, so that's generally a win with me. But yeah, I'll report back on the other side of that one. So, in a strange manoeuvre for me, I don't really have many words. I spent most of the time going, what is it you're trying to say? And I have ultimately concluded that her main message in life is down with the patriarchy, which I do agree with, but I'm not sure quite how she was trying to achieve that whilst talking about different kings from ancient Egypt. She seemed to just be saying, like, guess what? Ancient Egypt, patriarchy. Yes, it was. And then she would randomly, like, intersperse modern examples, but for the most part, there was one chapter towards the end where actually it was a bit more integrated, the comparisons she was trying to make, but in certain places it was just like, oh, by the way, you could randomly say this about this situation today, or this situation from the 60s. It's very strange. Really, it wasn't quite about politics, it wasn't quite about the stories of the individual kings, so... And that's all I've got to say about that, I think. However, after that, I feel like I need some fun fiction to be going on with, so I'm going to give this one a crack, which, based on the date on the back, which says September 2011, I've had for some time. And I think this is actually a proof copy that my dad had. So let me just read to you what it says on the back. There was once a young artist called Caru who drew tales of monsters and demons that delighted and enthralled those around her. But she has a secret. A secret that ties her to a dusty subterranean chamber where her beloved guardian brokers dark deals in a place that is not here. A place that is elsewhere with a capital E. Living with one foot in each world, Caru has never really known which one is her true home. Now, the doors to elsewhere are closing. So, needless to say, I ordered the second 2 books of the trilogy on my Kindle so that I could finish the story. What to say without ruining it? I really enjoyed it, actually. It's very much on the young adult side of things, which is nice because it's not then, I guess, overcomplicated by certain things, but you have a really interesting cast of characters. You meet your main cast in Prague, which is lovely. I've never been to Prague, I really want to go. You get some lovely descriptions of the city and their life there. So our main girl is called Caru, and she has a bestie called Susanna. So you see a lot of their adventures in Prague as sort of the setup for this story. And as the book goes on, you discover more and more about Caru's world, and that actually she's been hiding quite a lot of things from Susanna, not because she wants to, but because they're just frankly unbelievable. Because guess what? It's a fantasy novel. So you as the reader as well don't necessarily know much about Caru's other life, and then you suddenly sort of start to learn all these details just before Susanna finds out. She does eventually find out. She finds out all the secrets. And again, it's difficult to talk about that without spoiling it, I guess, but needless to say, her other life is, despite her being a human, quite fantasy-filled, and there are some really nice twists and turns and things that you didn't see coming. Some of the other characters that you will see from her other life are very much fantasy characters that you know, or that you have some sort of knowledge of. Others are a little bit different, so it's nice to be introduced to their world and what kind of creatures they are. So that's very interesting. And a lot of what you learn about that world then becomes sort of the central threads for the ongoing trilogy story, which is great. One of the things I enjoyed most about this book was actually that there's sort of a lot of comedy in it. Like, you know, the characters are really well built, and just when everything gets a little bit of just when everything gets a bit too serious, then one of your, you know, distinct characters comes up with like a one-liner or a something that you just go, yes, that's just what I needed to take the edge off that serious, tense moment. Interestingly, there's also a lot that Caru doesn't know about her own life, so there are lots of surprises and secrets to be had. So yeah, overall, I thought it was a really interesting narrative. Not necessarily like massively different to anything you might read in the genre, but it had its own, as I say, its twists and turns, and some things that you wouldn't have expected, some things that you thought you were going to predict that came out slightly differently, and the way that opens up in the second and third book is really nice. And again, lots of stuff that I wouldn't have necessarily expected coming. Interestingly, this book in and of itself wraps up quite nicely in terms of part 1 of the story. But when you get to the end of the trilogy, like, I don't know, you must have heard me talk about this before. Trilogy endings are like a real make or break moment, and I don't know, there was just so much going on at the end of the third book that then wasn't really tied up. It was almost like she'd left space for a further story later on, which, like, I don't know if that's part of her plan, because I think it's been like almost 10 years since she finished the trilogy. Or certainly 10 years since the first book. So maybe a little less than 10 years since she finished the trilogy. But yeah, I was like, the ending felt a bit rushed because she was trying to pull together a load of different concepts and sort of leave some stuff unexplained. I don't know, it sort of wrapped up, it sort of didn't. But yeah, overall I really enjoyed it. So this one is actually a keeper. I know. But since I've cleared a lot of space on the shelf, that's allowed. And since the other 2 books I bought on Kindle, also allowed. So next up, we are going into this lovely, I was about to say series of books. It's 2 books that I've got anyway. Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls. So there's 1 and there's 2. And it's literally like a page per story, but I think there's 100 stories of 100 remarkable women. So I'm really looking forward to that, actually. Sort of, I've been quite like tired going to bed recently, so when I try and read I fall asleep within about 5 seconds, so actually it's nice to have something where you can just read a few pages and be like, okay, I'm done, I haven't missed anything, but also have something inspirational to read before bed. So yeah, I'll report back on that. Okay, so these bad girls, I just can't even. I mean, can't remember if I gave you an example of this already, but just like, look at these beautiful illustrations. So on every page, you've got an independent artist illustrating these different stories. And, you know, this obviously is designed for young ladies, but it is also targeted at women of any age, just for beautiful inspiration and stories we didn't know. And I like to read before I go to bed, but I have that issue where I quite often doze off on my book, or if I happen to have my Kindle, slapping myself in the face with my Kindle. So sometimes it can be quite hard to find something that's good to read before going to bed. And there are 2 things I loved the most about these books. 1, I learned a whole load of new stories that I didn't know existed, and with a lot of them, because you've only got 1 page to sort of describe the outline of this person's story, I was like, ooh, I want to go and find out more. So, you know, I've been able to delve a lot deeper into some stories I didn't know about some really amazing, inspirational women. And 2, what's great about it is it's not so engaging that you get so caught up in your book that you can't sleep. But it actually just gives you a really nice burst of something inspirational to read before you go to sleep. And the power of that is immense, because if you've had a bad day that day, or you're maybe dreading what's coming up the next day, and yet you're reading about these women who've maybe overcome something huge, or who were fighting for their freedom or their rights, like it really just puts your life in context, not to downplay any of the, I guess, day-to-day difficulties that we all face, but it just gives you a moment of perspective. And I found it just giving me like a moment of fight to go like, no, I'm not happy about this thing in my life, and if this woman can do this with as little as she had, then what's stopping me? What's stopping me? And I don't think there could be anything more powerful than having a mindset moment like that before you go to sleep. So I love them. I absolutely love them. I want to see if there are more, actually, because I think these are a few years old now. So it'd be interesting to see if they've done more, because obviously there are endless stories out there that need to be captured. So yeah, so much love for that. After that, we had Legendborn. So, talking of love, I loved this so much. Like, I'd seen mixed reviews on booktube about it, but I was sold. I was sold. I had that classic thing of like, it took me a couple of chapters to get into what was going on. But you've basically kind of got some things you know about fantasy world, or some things you think you know about fantasy world, but kind of approached in a different way. So there is a form of demonic activity, there is a form of magic, and there you can definitely tell where some of that has been built on sort of the mythological side of demons and magic, and that's lovely. I love all of that kind of stuff. I love the lore. I love the lore of mythology. And then they combined that with the mythology of the Arthurian legends. I mean, they didn't at this stage, because it's like the first in a series, so I don't know if it's going to be a trilogy, does it say? It just says the first book in a series. So yeah, I don't know if they'll dive even deeper into the Arthurian mythology, but I just loved that. I loved that combination. I loved the way they have positioned it, the way they've thought about it, the way they've interwoven those two concepts. And even within that, so you sort of have the lens of the people involved in the Arthurian legend, and then you have the lens of people who approach magic in a different way and perhaps see these Arthurian guys, who you would traditionally assume to be quite heroic, to perhaps not be as clean cut or as black and white as you might expect them to be. There were just some really nice themes explored. There were some interesting characters at the heart of it. Naturally, there's sort of like a lovable, what do I want to call, like a lovable grumpy guy, a guy with issues who's also really lovable. His name is Sel, and I want to take him home, give him a cuddle. Bree, the main character, is also great, like quite a hot temper, but like sassy in a good way. And as you learn more about her story and what's happened to her in the past and how that links to all this mythology, that's really interesting. There are one or two other main characters who you do get to know in certain pieces. We unfortunately lose some of them during the course of the book. And I did find that like some of those secondary characters, I couldn't really form who was who in my mind, because you've got quite a lot of them thrown at you at once as you start to get introduced to them. But yes, I also love Bree's best friend, Alice. She's also like nerdy but sassy. And she, you know, perhaps a classic trope, but she is the best friend who doesn't really live in this mythological world. She's just kind of outside it, but when she gets brought in, she just comes in with no fear and a lot of sass, and I love that so much. So yeah, I was basically just really sad when this one ended. What was nice is that there was at least a wrap up of this particular part of the story. So you're introduced to Bree, you're introduced to her life, you gradually learn this mythology as she's learning it, so that's really fun. I like it when you see bits of stuff and you're trying to figure it out as she's trying to figure it out, so that was cool. You then get introduced to these characters who sit within the Arthurian part of the legend, and as you go through that, you really see development within where Bree is going. There were a few awesome surprises towards the end, but there was then sort of a end of chapter 1 type wrap up, and you're like, okay, I feel satisfied with that, because the second book is not out until November. And because I'm doing so well with my TBR, I may have pre-ordered it. So basically I have to try and clear the rest of the shelves by November, which should be doable. Should. We're doing quite well. There's quite a lot of gaps now. So yeah, loved it. What came next was Bone Season, which I kind of thought was going to be in the same realms, and it sort of was. Interestingly, there was a lot of talk about the ether in both books, but used in a slightly different way. But I like it when you get that mythology crossover as well. So yeah, Bone Season. I didn't not enjoy it. it took me a while to get into it. And again, it took quite a while to learn who was who and what was what. So there's quite a, let's see if I can find it. There is quite a complex explanation of the different types of people that you're going to meet. So the main dichotomy of the piece is people who are not clairvoyant versus people who are clairvoyant. And that map basically describes many, many different types of clairvoyant people, or voyants, as they call them. So really just trying to get your head around who is who and what their gift is a little bit difficult, especially as they then have slang words for all of their gifts. And you don't necessarily meet everyone with every type of gift at this point. I did look up to see how many books are in this series, and at the moment it's up to like 6 or something, which slightly horrified me because, as I say, I didn't not enjoy it. And I guess if you're going to develop understanding of that kind of world, that's a useful thing. But again, there was sort of a lot of secondary characters who you don't necessarily get huge amounts of time to get to know. So I didn't feel that I warmed to a lot of the characters. I was a bit like, Like I didn't mind Paige, the main character. She was obviously going through lots of development, but again, like probably the first half of the book I found quite surface level because I just wasn't feeling it. I just wasn't feeling it. And then as you get sort of towards the meat of it, once you've gotten to know Paige and the world that she lives in and that you've got this big dichotomy, there is a reveal. And that reveal is a good reveal. Like, the world as you knew it is not as you knew it. So you've just spent all this time trying to understand that first layer of world, and then you're introduced to a new world. And I think this is probably why there are so many books in the series already, is because there's a whole lot of world to delve into. Once you sort of got to this middle bit, I was like, okay, I actually enjoyed it probably more from the twist and into the latter half. And then there are a few more characters who you do get to know in a bit more detail. So Paige has a warden. This is very hard to talk about this without then giving away the story again. So yeah, Paige has a warden as you get into the second half of the book. And you can sort of see where it's going. You can see that actually they're going to spend so much time together, and even though she hates him to begin with, you can see that that's going to turn into something else. And it does. But you don't really get to explore that in this book. And based on what I've seen of the narrative for the next 6 books, you're not really exploring that either. There's a whole lot of like, they keep missing each other. It's very sort of like extended rom-com, will they ever actually be together kind of thing. But there are a lot of, because your focus is mostly on those two and maybe 1 or 2 secondary characters, what's interesting is that there are another series of twists as you go through the second half, and you don't see most of them coming because you're too busy focusing on these central characters and their few peripheries and what's going on with them. And it's, you know, it's done at a very day-to-day detail level, but actually it turns out months have passed. So yeah, I think the second section of the book goes on for a period of 6 months, but it doesn't feel like that because you're sort of dropped into pockets of time where you go into a lot of detail. And as I say, you're quite focused on, you know, maybe these 2 central characters and then a few periphery characters. So then when you get all these reveals, you're like, oh, didn't see that, oh, didn't see that, oh, didn't see that, which is great. I love that. I love to be actually surprised by twists and not see them coming. But I don't know, it just felt like a lot of hard work to get there. And I think based on where they left off, I was like, oh, okay, cool. But it also then feels to me at the moment like that storyline is now going to be dragged over another 5-6 books before you get to some kind of resolution. And when I got to the end of this, I was like, I don't have the energy for that. And that for me is a sign that I enjoyed something, but I'm done. I'm drawing a line. I'm drawing a line. So I can't promise I won't change my mind later on. But at the moment I was like, it does just sound like that overarching storyline is going to be dragged out for another few books and not in a way that I'm going to enjoy. It's just going to frustrate me. It's that thing where like you're watching a series on TV and you're not really enjoying it, but there's enough of a, oh, I want to know what happens, that you have to keep watching it, and then you feel like you've wasted 8 to 10 hours of your life just trying to find out what happened, even though you weren't really enjoying it. Like, that's kind of how I felt, except I did not enjoy it, but I'm happy to draw a line at the end of that. So yeah. So I didn't even get a chance to show it to you. I just started it on the random and finished it on the random. It's this one, Water for Elephants. Now, I'd seen the film of this one and I've only seen it once and I remember being not impressed. But now having read the book, I understand why I wasn't impressed. I don't think I thought much of the casting of the film. Despite liking Reese Witherspoon in general, I didn't think it was one of her best. I don't think she really, I guess, fitted the character in my mind. And especially now I have read the book, I'm like, no. That said, what did I think of the book? I read it quite quickly. It's quite, despite looking quite fat, the type is quite big, so it's actually quite a quick book to read. And partly because there's not huge amounts of substance. It's styled as if being written by the main, or narrated rather, by the main male character. And you sort of flash between him in his 90s in a nursing home and his life in the circus, like how he came to be there and what happens, blah, blah, blah. And it actually seems to carry on along quite a short period, actually, even though they imply when you're meeting him in the nursing home that he was there for several years. It doesn't really feel like it, perhaps because of the lack of substance in the storytelling. But I guess that's my expectation of what I want when I read a book, whereas I guess the mission was just someone recollecting a part of their life, so you're not necessarily going to have huge amounts of depth. You're just telling a life story. It just so happened to be in the circus and one or two dramatic things happened. So from that perspective, it did its job. I have to say though, like the hardest parts to read were actually the parts of him in the nursing home, because it's actually written by a lady who I guess looks to be in her 40s from the picture on the back, or certainly obviously when she wrote it. But yeah, that sort of insight of feeling like your life is over and I guess feeling incapacitated, and there being so many things you want to do and you feeling very mentally strong but not being able to act upon any of this. Like, it was, that really got me. I guess partly from the perspective of we've all felt a little bit trapped recently thanks to COVID and multiple lockdowns and things. But that for me is actually the thing that does scare me about aging. Like, I'm not at all worried about aging in general, but what I am worried about is being incapacitated. I love to dance, I love to move, I love to run around and learn new things, and I am scared that there may be a time when I don't get to do that. So yeah, that kind of hit home a little bit, but yeah, otherwise a pleasant enough book, but I wasn't that bothered by it, to be honest. So that's that one. Next up, is this beast, Girl, Woman, Other, which I'm sure I said before at some point is a series of stories about different types of women in different scenarios. It was the Booker Prize winner in 2019, and other than that, I know nothing about it. It smells lovely though. Like, I will admit I own a Kindle, although I will also admit I did not pay for that Kindle. Actually, that's a lie, I own 2 Kindles. I have a Kindle that I've had for years. Like, it's not original Kindle, I think it's generation 2, and it was a Christmas gift from an old client. And I love that, to be honest. It's because I used to take like 25 books on holiday with me, then buy more when I got to the airport. So that's great for taking with me if I'm traveling. And because it was the earlier generation, it didn't have a touch screen or anything, so it's actually got that blunted screen, so you don't get any screen glare, which is amazing, and I love it for that. I will hold on to it forever. I'm worried it's going to break one day and then I will cry. And then I have another Kindle which I also didn't pay for. It was one that my dad had, and when he passed away I took a claim of that, and I actually used that for currently looking at cosplay books. And yeah, also for playing the music when I'm teaching hula hoops. There you go. Anyway, onwards. I'm going to read this and let you know what I think. So, let's talk girl, woman, other. I don't even know where to start. I'm sure I've mentioned before that my standard go-to novel would be in the fantasy genre, anything featuring magic and or dragons. So this being about actual real life, very, very different to anything that I would normally read. So I guess I almost don't really have anything to compare it to. And it was interesting in so many different ways. Like, one, it's almost written in this stream of consciousness style, so there is little to no punctuation throughout. So at certain points you're being told about someone's life, and then there will be a comment or some sort of commentary interspersed from them having a conversation with someone. But it all happens in that stream of consciousness flow. There's no kind of punctuation to indicate that. So it's weirdly very immersive. Like, normally I would find that sort of thing quite irritating, but yeah, it is just like being in someone's head as you're reading this. And you've got basically 12, I think, different sort of stories. But actually, interestingly, they do all interlink at certain points. And there were actually some where I was like, there wasn't enough of their story or of the interlinking. There were some loose ends that I did want to be like, oh, but what happened after that? What happened to this girl? And what happened with that relationship? But I guess that's the point, isn't it? So, yeah, 12 very different, very real, very insightful stories of real life. And so that draws this section of TBR to a close. It was supposed to be spring, but I guess we're officially into summer now. Like, I have some books that I'll get through really quickly. I have other ones that just take forever because maybe I haven't got a specific block of time, and if, as I say, if I try and read before I go to bed, sometimes I just fall asleep in my book. So yes, some things are moving quickly, some things are a bit slower, but yes, that was like spring into summer, so I guess the next one will be summer into autumn. But yeah, hopefully as we get into autumn, winter, I might be done with the bookshelf TBR, and then I can actually be allowed to buy new books again. So yeah, I really hope that you enjoyed this collection of awesome and slightly less awesome books. If you've read any of these, I'd love to hear your thoughts below. If you've got any recommendations, I would also love to hear that. Otherwise, I'll see you again in the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye!